Uh, Thanks for staying here, even though Vitalik is speaking. I assume you all heard him plenty. Or you missed that. In that case, feel free to run. Yeah, also excuse for the slides. My bot is annoying. I don't know why it thinks that temporary gatherings are so much more important than durable institutions. I think it's the other way around. So I want to open this talk with a simple observation, that is, crypto started with strong digital intentions and imagination, basically to build institutions that are global, permissionless, composable, and do that through digital means, right? Through protocols, tokens, and DAOs. And yet, over the last few years, the most interesting energy for me, at least, has happened in mid-space. So I'm talking about the conference circuit and what came of it. Temporary gatherings of longer and longer form, pop-up cities, network states, permanent hubs, cooperative ownership, new experiments with land, housing, governance, and shared infrastructure. And the question I'm asking is, why is a movement so focused on digital coordination, rediscovering place and space? And my argument here is that this is not just a lifestyle trend. It's not just that that many of us are in their late 30s and starting to think about kids and such. It actually reflects a deeper institutional problem. So I come to this topic from two sides. On one hand, I am a researcher. I did a doctoral research in political science on crypto commons, so that are communities that try to use blockchain infrastructure to collectively steward resources. And from 2018 to 24, I studied several crypto commons projects and their communities in depth. I looked at the mechanisms they build, at the narratives they develop around these mechanisms, and at their culture, their social ties. And second, and that's what I'm doing more these days, I come to this talk as a builder. Over the last 5 years, I have been building the Commons Hub in the Austrian Alps, which you see on the right side, right? Which is a place-based experiment in communal living, working, and institution building. On the left side, you see me and my brother when I just got my Laurea. And my brother is my co-founder, right? So this talk sits between research and practice, and it asks what crypto communities have learned about decentralized institutions, and why so many of us are now experimenting with places, gatherings, villages, and so on. Now, crypto has always had an institutional imagination. It was never just about payments or speculation, and at least in its more ambitious versions, crypto always asked, how can we coordinate without centralized intermediaries? How can we govern shared resources? How can we create credible commitments among strangers? But the field has mainly tried to answer these questions through mechanism design. Better protocols, better incentive structures, governance modules, or voting systems. And I think that the last decade has shown both the promise and the limit of that approach. Mechanisms certainly matter, but mechanisms alone do not create durable institutions. And to explain why, I want to briefly clarify what I mean by institutions and by affordances. By institutions, I do not mean only formal organizations, and by no means do I mean the institutions whose institutional money is going to soon come and save all our bags. I mean, rather, by institutions I mean routine ways of doing things that structure collective life. Institutions reduce uncertainty. They lower transaction costs, and they tell us what to expect from one another. So institutions are not made of rules alone. They shape behavior through several forces at once, and you see them on the quadrant. We have formal law, we have architecture, we have social norms and markets. And these four impact on our behaviors and make us do things in certain ways. Now, over the last decade, crypto has tended to focus mostly on what it can directly build and affect, so protocols, smart contracts, incentive mechanisms, in other words, architecture and some degree of market building. But again, mechanism design alone is not enough to build durable institutions. And here, the concept of affordances helps broaden the horizon a bit. An affordance is an actionable property of a technology as perceived by an actor. That means it's not destiny, it's not abstract technological essence. As technical features lend themselves to certain uses, but it depends on who uses them, to what ends, and in what context. And I find a book is a great example of an affordance, right? If you are literate, a book affords reading. If you're illiterate, you can still burn it or throw it at people, or you can show off with it. Again, sorry for my AI slides. So yeah, when I speak of blockchain's institutional affordances, I do not mean that blockchain automatically creates better institutions. I mean that some of its technical features lend themselves to certain institutional uses. And now some examples from my research, or well, examples of such affordances I found in my research, and I think they were on crypto commons, but I think they apply to blockchain at large. So first, trustless accountability. I guess you all have an imagination what that could be. Blockchains can make actions permanently visible, traceable, auditable. But the challenge that I'm sure all of you also experienced already, in open-ended communities, value is heterogeneous. The evaluation of an action depends on social judgment. So both the recording of an action is already hard, because you have to codify it, and then evaluation of how much is your tweet worth as compared to my 6 months of coding, it's a value judgment. It's very hard to automate. So we end up again with the need for social judgment. That means trust, shared context, and the living sense of a group's aims. Second, we have, I found contractual organizability. Again, we know that dream at least from DAOs. Smart contracts allow people to organize through automatically executing rule sets. The challenge here is that governance design still has to be guided by the aims and values of a specific community. We know what we want. And this needs to be encodable, thus first known, stable, and formalizable. Easier for some settings or aspirations than for others. And third, the grand dream of permissionless mechanization. Crypto allows us to prototype institutional patterns or mechanisms without waiting for permission. And that's great, and that's what many have been doing for the last decade. It lowers implementation costs and accelerates experimentation. We have a sandbox in which we can play. But it does not solve the deeper question, and that is, what institutional design is acceptable in a given situation? What will actually work, will be accepted by people and by markets? So in short, trustless accountability runs into the problem of social judgment. Contractual organizability runs into political values, or the need for encoded and known political values. Permissionless mechanization then runs into market pressure or acceptance more generally, right? And all three of them point to the social dimension of institutions. Crypto has often underestimated the social dimension of institutions for two reasons. On the one hand, ideological reasons. Part of crypto inherited a quite reductionist libertarian social theory, in which centralized institutions are imagined mostly as constraints, and freedom basically essentially means replacing these centralized institutions with contracts, markets, and code. We do not look at the social. And the other is historical. Early crypto developed in a relatively lawless or extra-legal space, and thus rejected law as, or the idea of law as a positive regulatory force. Not saying that law has to come back, right? But that's two reasons for me that the social dimension is underrepresented in crypto. But the problem is that in the absence of law, and let's say we settle for, we do not want the state to interfere there, but in the absence of law, social norms come under pressure from markets. They become harder to establish and to maintain, especially under conditions of systemic anonymity, right? And that's essentially, well, the North Korean hacker problem that we have now. And, well, in terms of social norms, behavior will always risk regression to the code. Basically, Whatever is not technically prevented becomes permitted and in social norms terms accepted. Code is law, code permitted doing that, so it's by default okay. And that means whatever can be extracted will be extracted. Again, the code is law versus North Korean hackers drama in a nutshell. Now, in my research, I saw communities respond in two ways to this problem of protecting social norms. On the one hand, technical adaptation, reshaping technical architecture to make it more compatible with your needs, and in their case, it was commons governance. But there are many needs. For example, as examples I found is replacing pure anonymity with off-chain identity, reducing plutocratic influence through quadratic voting, or requiring proof of presence, proof of sweat for governance power. And the broader Blockchain for Good movement has produced many interesting approaches in this realm over the last years. I do think that technical adaptation also has its limits though, both in terms of technical feasibility and in terms of market acceptance of those modifications. And the second response that I found, and I want to focus on more here, is social scaffolding. So what I call social scaffolding is the deliberate cultivation of norms, of relationships, identities, rituals, expectations, and informal accountability that make a community governable. And here the token engineering commons are a project that has been around, I'd say like since 2020, 21 maybe, until 24, 25. That was one of my case studies, is a good example. For 2 years before launching a token, they had a so-called cultural build that created a dense social world around the project. So shared language, collective identity, repeated interaction, rituals, and the sense that the commons was something to steward and not simply to extract from. None of that technically prevented individual profit maximization, but it made pure extraction much less socially legitimate. And that distinction matters. So in contrast to simple rule sets, institutions also work by making certain actions unthinkable, shameful, illegitimate, or simply out of character, out of role. So in conclusion, my research highlights the need for thicker social worlds around crypto. It highlights the need for communities with memory, towards known members, towards repeated interaction, towards spaces where people do not only coordinate, but become accountable to each other over time. And this brings us to pop-up cities. Pop-up cities, pop-up villages, residencies, this conference circuit we're all part of, and other forms of gatherings that have been popping up over the last years. I think that these formats matter precisely because they respond to this missing social layer of the digital realm. They create shared context, they make people known to each other, they allow norms, rituals, expectations, and informal accountability to emerge much faster than online. And in that sense, pop-up cities themselves are a form of social scaffolding. And at their best, they are temporary institutional laboratories. They allow communities to test what their values mean in practice. Not only in governance forums or smart contracts, but in shared space, shared meals, shared work, and sometimes shared conflict. But they also reveal the limits of temporality. So temporary gatherings can create intensity, trust, and inspiration, but precisely because they're temporary, they struggle with continuity, with local integration, and the gap between vision and practice. So continuity is obviously hard because temporary worlds do not automatically produce memory, maintenance, or accountability over time. Local integration is hard because the surrounding place can easily just become a backdrop for a couple of weeks. A beautiful scenery, local flavor, few invited stakeholders, but not a genuinely participating social world, because why should they care about your 4-week event, right? That leaves, they stay. And then the gap between vision and practice is partially inherent to the format. Pop-up cities operate often with institution scale ambitions. to develop new civic forms, new economies, new ways of living together, UN recognition. But they usually do not have the time depth needed for such cultures and institutions to actually develop. It always stays an ambition, more or less vague. A pop-up can ask, can we create a different social world for a few weeks? And yes, sometimes we can, especially if everyone shows their best side for a while and we suppress conflict. But a permanent space has to ask harder questions. Can any of this survive repetition? How does culture evolve over time? How does culture emancipate itself from charismatic individuals? So how do we overcome the founders problem? How does culture become an invisible layer guiding interaction into smoother, more expectable paths? And that is a quest for institutions. Permanence, however, does not solve these problems automatically. In fact, it often makes them sharper if they're not addressed. Permanence introduces property, maintenance, neighbors, local law, recurring conflict, governance fatigue, and long-term responsibility. And I've been facing all of that over the last 5 years. If you see that, I hit my head 2 days ago on working on the electric grid of the house. So it is a different kind of beast. Yeah, but precisely for that reason, it is also institutionally interesting. A permanent hub cannot only live on the vision, cannot remain a vision only. It has to become operational, it has to meet the local social world and keep on meeting and dealing with the local social world, as it does not end after 4 weeks. It has to develop rhythms, roles, boundaries, it has to deal with conflict rather than suppressing it, and it has to let culture emerge. Now, this, and excuse my shill, is where my own work comes in. Over the last 5 years, as I mentioned, I have been co-building the Commons Hub in the Austrian Alps, which is a place-based experiment in communal living, working and institution building, and Valley of the Commons is our next step in this direction. It will launch as a 4-week pop-up village in late August 26. So formally, or initially, it is still a temporary event, but the intention is to use it as a springboard to our permanent plans of seeding the valley, of starting to build co-workings, co-livings, so shared mansions, shared villas, shared housing, either among families. I'm currently looking with 2-3 other families to purchase a house and live there permanently, but also more for digital nomads that want to have a semi-permanent base, stuff like that. But then also beyond that, not just living, but also co-working, as said, but also co-producing. So we're looking into cosmolocal ways of production, into fab labs, into local manufacturing, and doing that as much as possible as a commons, so as commonly owned property, not as a co-working company renting out spaces necessarily, right? And then we also face lots of other questions, but I'm happy to go into that in more detail if you come by our booth that is over there in the community area. We also have a nice 3D printed model of the valley and stuff. But yeah, I do want to finish this presentation where I derail a bit. The question for me is not only how to host another good gathering, of which we've done many in the last years. The question is how temporary communities can become entry points into more durable infrastructures, shared spaces, shared ownership, local production, cooperative housing, and commons governance. And for me, in a way, this is also a continuation of my research. I did not want to stay in academia after finishing my PhD. It's too dry and boring. I want to build stuff. But still, I want to continue in this inquiry, right? So my PhD looked at how crypto commons try to build decentralized institutions and how they use social scaffolding to strengthen social norms against market pressures. Commons Hub and Valley of the Commons now explore the same question in practice. How can communal life become how can communal life beyond extractive systems grow into durable institutions? By the way, that warning sign should be a QR code. Told you my bot betrayed me. You can come by. We also put out some flyers here, so or just come and talk to us. We're at the community booth. These guys are there as well. But I'm going to make quickly my closing claim, which is simple. Crypto has developed powerful tools for coordination, yes, but coordination is not the same as institution building. Durable institutions need mechanisms, but they also need memory. They need social norms, they need legitimacy, and they need communities that can hold each other accountable over time. Temporary gatherings show that this desire exists. The current move towards hubs and villages asks whether it can endure. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix, for the great presentation. Do we have any questions from the audience? If not, there is a question. Perfect.
Thank you for the presentation. So I've been around some of these pop-ups for the last 3 years now, and you're right in terms of the temporal aspect is good for experimentation. Time-bound helps people to get out of their shell, to connect, to innovate, to iterate very fast, right? So they serve a purpose. But I am seeing this trend in terms of moving towards more permanent and then having anchors and roots in addition to traveling to share information and to share knowledge. So my question is that aren't we over-engineering this? Aren't we trying to force community where community should be naturally emerging in terms of the shared values or interest? Aren't we overdoing things? Because sometimes we just need to plan the scaffolding and then just allow people to come and take over.
To some degree, I certainly agree with you. We can risk over-engineering the social question or prefiguring the institutions or the social side of institutions, right? Or even not just the social side, the whole thing. Yes, build a community and its culture, its rules and its institutions will come. But I do think that it's also, and especially as we are using technologies to facilitate some of these, or for the architectural side of some of these institutions, and that needs active development and takes time and so on. We need to think about these things. The social side, yes, we need to give it some wiggle room to figure itself out and constitute itself. To some degree. I do think that create the community or create the space where people live together actively as an intentional community, and they will develop their institutions. Yes, but as we are in a technologically driven sphere, I'd say, this question of choosing the right mechanisms, choosing the right technological substrate is a relevant one. And if we don't look at that consciously, right, we risk importing mechanisms developed for elsewhere with different political values baked into them, importing them because it's easy, because this code already exists, but then we also inherit the political baggage with it and the assumptions that went into it.
There was one more hand, I think, here in the front. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. And I think it is indeed, like from a social perspective, really interesting to look at permanent hubs. From a sustainability perspective, how do you see that changing from doing temporary gatherings in different places to having one place? How do you look at that?
What sustainability are you talking about?
The sustainability from a capital perspective.
Well, I guess that it shifts. I think it could be more sustainable to stay in a place, not travel around and book hotels all the time, if that is what you mean. But I certainly hope to bring down costs of living as compared to the conference circuit, but I'm not sure that is exactly what you're asking for. There are so many aspects of sustainability, right? There's the sustainability, social sustainability of the group. Does our culture condense, and do we actually build one, or does it fall apart? how do we deal with conflict and such. So that's one question of sustainability. Then there is the local environmental sustainability. There is global. Is it sustainable to fly around the conference circuit all the time? No. Better to stay in a place. But yeah, many dimensions. Do you want to specify?
Well, I think it allows very different business models to have a permanent place.
Absolutely. I think in the temporary gatherings are a first step, and many of the temporary gatherings we've seen pop up in the last years are starting to think about permanence, and that's not by chance, right? And it's, yeah, as said, it is. Maybe one reason is that many of us want to have kids and such and not travel around all the time, but it's also a more institutional reason behind that. And one of them is also building businesses and having stability to build businesses. So this is something I'm also thinking about a lot with the Commons Hub I'm building, that for me the Commons Hub is first the economic engine that makes the bigger project viable by providing capacity, providing jobs and such, but it's also a platform for future businesses to plug into and to build their own thing on top. And this stability is something that I think temporary gatherings cannot provide in that way.
Great, thank you very much. So we can thank the speaker again.
Thank you.